Hello and welcome to PoE Bad Builds. False Prelate here. Today I'd like to talk about an item called Pillar of the Caged God Iron Staff. So this is an item that I've always liked and I wanted to make a build around, but I haven't really been able to come up with an idea that was viable for endgame content. However, with the big sweeping melee changes in patch 3.7, this build has become a lot more viable. And that's mostly due to a number of changes to the core mechanics of melee skills and also to the passive tree. Before I go into those changes, let me talk quickly about what this staff does. So the Pillar of the Caged God staff has a modifier that has 16% increased physical damage with attacks for every 10 strength, which means if you're able to stack around 1000 strength, you can get 1600% increased physical damage. This makes scaling flat physical damage very, very, very strong. This brings me to the first major buff that Pillar of the Caged God builds got, and that is the addition of the Utmost Mite cluster. So this cluster has a node with 40 strength and 8% increased strength. It also has two travel nodes that have 15 strength each, bringing us to a total of 70 strength. So with the Pillar of the Caged God bonus, that is 112% increased physical damage with attacks, which is a pretty substantial amount of damage. The next major addition from the 3.7 melee balance changes is the addition of a ton of flat physical damage to sources that previously did not have it. So one of the biggest changes is that a number of the active skill gems actually have flat physical added to them now. So one of those is Cyclone. The other two that Pillar of the Caged God can use are Sweep and Ground Slam. Now I tried out Sweep and I tried out Ground Slam, and they both kind of have too slow of attack speed to clear maps really efficiently. So Cyclone was kind of the big pick here. So Cyclone has a ton of added flat damage, and that scales our damage more than anything else because we get so much increased damage scaling from Pillar of the Caged God that the biggest increases of damage are going to be flat increases. So definitely having the active skill gems scale that now is a huge bonus. And then on top of that, we got Rage, which also scales with flat damage if you build up enough Rage stacks. And that's kind of another reason why I decided to go Cyclone, because you can just build these stacks so much faster by hitting things really quickly with your Cyclone. I think it's also important to note here that because we're getting a lot of flat physical from our active and passive skill gems, that our gearing has become more flexible. And we don't have to take certain picks that we used to have to take for this build. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier when I was saying the build has changed quite dramatically. And specifically, in our helm slot, we don't have to take Abyssus anymore, which was kind of a mandatory item before because the flat fizz that it gave was so huge. But now we make up that plus more with the skill gems. So it's not really necessary to take it. And that's really big because the downside to Abyssus, the increased physical damage taken, was a really big drawback to this build. And it kind of limited the ascendancies that you could use because you had to do something that was tanky. Generally something like a Juggernaut, so that you could mitigate that increased physical damage taken. But now, because of the flexibility with gearing, that is no longer an issue. Another big buff to Pillar of the Caged God builds came from the melee ascendancy class rework. So specifically, the Berserker and the Slayer classes both got some really important tools to help scale damage further. The Slayer got AoE, weapon melee range, critical strike chance, and critical strike multiplier. And the Berserker got some critical strike chance and some flat physical damage. I ended up going with the Slayer because I wanted to scale the AoE a little bit further, but either choice would have been okay. By now you've probably noticed that a lot of the buffs that I've been talking about are indirect buffs. That is, changes to other mechanics in the game that affect Pillar of the Caged God in some way. Another one of these is the changes to Impale. Impale previously didn't really have any way to scale it if you weren't using one of the Impale active skill gems. But now we have two new clusters on the skill tree that allow you to scale it and scale effect of Impale, and a support gem that also lets you have some Impale chance and increased effect of Impale. For a build that goes brutality, this is absolutely huge because it's another way to scale damage other than increased damage. And on this particular build, it's really, really important because increases to damage, that is increased physical damage, make almost no difference on this build because you already have so much from the Pillar of the Caged God. So you're looking for other ways to scale the damage. We do it through Impale and through critical strikes and through more damage because of support gems. So the increase to the availability of Impale is just absolutely massive for this build. Which brings me to the final set of changes that were really the icing on the cake. And those are the changes to accuracy. So accuracy used to be capped out at 95%, and in the last change, they made it cap out at 100%, and they made it easier to get accuracy on the tree. In particular, Staves got a big buff here, and on the passive tree, there are a number of clusters now where you can get accuracy, crit, and attack speed with Staves. So what does this mean for Pillar of the Caged God builds? Well, it means that since we got a lot of buffs, this build is actually very strong to play. I'm hitting pretty high damage numbers. I think I'm doing somewhere around 600 or 700k DPS. I'm not really sure though because Path of Building doesn't factor in Impale, and I've invested very heavily into Impale now. But I'm definitely clearing packs with ease. Unique monsters are melting in front of my eyes. It feels good. Okay, so I'm not going to do a build guide like I would normally do. Instead, I think I'll just leave my gear at the end of this video, and I'll have a link to the Path of Building in the description. So thank you for watching, and yeah, hit the like and subscribe button if you liked what you saw.